Living Land Theatre. I think you'll agree it's a great advert for this year, and I think it's certainly yesterday was brilliant, and these speakers keep coming. So my thanks must go to all the sponsors, particularly English Woodland. I think the place looks great. So obviously, for those who don't know me, I'm Duncan Ellis. I'm a bit of I'm a farmer, I suppose, and I'm trying to think about how we can reimagine landscape. And so we've called this, we've created an ethos we call Longbridge, which is a way that we think about landscape and trying to inspire a new generation to want to get involved in that space. And I think, how do you start the narrative? I think fundamentals are water. I think it's the one thing that most of us will all agree on, that we all want clean drinking water. And I'm really blessed to have some amazing heads here. I'll start with Allison, who we know well locally, but she's a brilliant mind. She was a presenter for the BBC. She's also, and I must get this right because I always get it wrong, it was a senior programme director at Wilton Park, which is the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So we are distinguished guests. So thank you very, very much for your time. I'll get off the stage quickly and then hand it over to you.
Pleasure, thank you. Can everybody hear? That would be great. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Duncan. What a pleasure to be here. I'd really like to welcome my three guests today. I'll welcome them by name in just a moment. But we're going to have a conversation, as Duncan said, around water and water resilience. And there is so much to talk about here. You will never get out of this tent, actually, if I've got anything to do with it. So thank you for your attention. Now, why is water so important? The United Nations recently reminded us that we're moving into an era of water bankruptcy, and 2/3 of everybody in the world suffers from water scarcity at some time. And we know how unpredictable water is here. Goodness, torrential rain this morning, then the driest spring on record. And the last few weeks we've seen that really dry weather, drying up the land, and then of course the weather that we have today. But it means that water is this defining issue, defining for farmers, defining for food production, defining for how we live our lives. Water, if you like, is that thread that connects everything. And so that's what we're here to discuss. Let's zoom in for a minute on water resilience, and particularly water resilience here in the southeast. Let me welcome my first guest. So Mark Betson, a water resources specialist at the NFU. Maybe, Mark, you can just start by painting us a picture of the pressure there is on water in the southeast.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the invitation today, and I'll try and paint a bit of a picture about some of the pressure that's on water in the southeast from an agricultural perspective, because that's the area we're to cover. Principally, it's around both access to water for agriculture and for all the other needs that are required amongst communities. And for farming, it's noted that the impacts of climate change is one of the biggest drivers in terms of the challenges around water. So we had published last year our 10-year survey of farmers about what the priority issues are in terms of the climate, and over 70% recognised that extreme weather was one of the major issues which were impacting their business. And we put a value on that. It was sort of on average around about £40,000 worth of impact on people's businesses, and the sort of key aspects that were impacting people were flood and drought, and as well as other sort of extreme events which happen. So you note that the water is always too much, too little, and the ability to sustain that in terms of agricultural production becomes more and more challenging. So in terms of where the critical issues are, that is certainly what's happening in the short term in terms of water scarcity and too much water in the winter. But then we've got sort of other challenges around the medium-term aspects of water availability, which is looking at some of the competing demands that we have around water. As the South East knows particularly well, there's a lot of call for development at this point in time, a lot of people who are moving into the area, and there is a challenge around how you can supply that and deal with the waste from that that is competing with other areas such as data centres, such as growth in business use of water. All of this, all of these competing demands have to be reconciled, and yet there's still no real mechanism by which we can do that. However, you've got to set the sort of the course about where you want to end up at the end of the day, and I think from an agricultural perspective, we need to look at the future in terms of how do we farm for water, and at the same time, how do we ensure that there is enough food, enough water to produce the food that we need, that has been recognised that the country is looking to develop. The National Food Strategy says that we are not self-sufficient enough in fresh fruit and vegetables. Fresh fruit and vegetables, all production of those, all are underpinned by access to water. So water is absolutely critical for our food production, as well as farming being critical for our water supply.
Thank you. Very good to look at on the sharp end how farmers are dealing with water. And maybe Martin, I can introduce you now. So Martin Hole, an organic livestock farmer on the Pevensey levels. We've heard about the challenges from Mark. What about the challenges for you as a farmer who's dealing with the unpredictability of water every day?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to outdo the motorbikes. And you might be amazed that I will start doing that by talking to you about livestock. So we have a very adapted livestock system at home. We farm on the Pevensey marshes, the country's most biodiverse wetland. And we have that gorgeous creature, the Sussex cow, who likes eating rushes and reeds and thistles, all the things that I'm very good at growing. And we have the Romney Marsh ewe, which will produce about 1.3 lambs with zero input and very little shepherding. I'm very good at very little shepherding. So we have native bred stock, and we push them into these watery environments, which we've taken 30 years to produce. 2 generations of farmers have been making the farm wetter and more difficult to live in. And it's been a thrilling journey. So really, we've made a difficult environment for a very unsexy level of livestock, and we've made a profit over that period of time, which is, of course, critical. More critical, and I've been doing a bit of research on Duncan here, just to see how interested his children are in taking on a farming situation. If you're not excited about farming, if you're not passionate, if you can't get to the edge of your seat, don't bother. So it's nice to see that Duncan's enthusiasm has gone into his family, and I farm with my daughter, and she gets at least as excited as I do about farming in these natural environments. So let me just say a little bit more about farming in a natural environment. It is a great ride. Imagine a Constable painting. Imagine that it's alive. Imagine that you live in it. Imagine that the water in Flatford Mill catches the sun as it moves and is clear as clear. Imagine the man fixing the wheels on the hay wain talks to you in an impenetrable Suffolk accent, I suspect, but he may be talking to you. Imagine the crickets chirping in the undergrowth. Imagine the birds calling. Imagine the clouds moving. Imagine the light that plays on that landscape. There's no favorite colors in a color scheme that keeps moving. So that is what a landscape is. It is a constantly moving, enriching, peopled, noisy, smelly place, and we love it. So don't have a fixed view of that, and maybe water more than anything else, because water itself is a living creature. So if you have any children, and if you're worried about their attention straying towards motorbikes, make them imagine that they are 4 inches tall and strap them back to the chest on the front of a lapwing. Now, a lapwing, so through your back, you will feel the heartbeat of this bird. You will feel the blood pulsing. You will feel the vibration of its muscle. And you will be drowned by its insistent calling. And then you will be taken on the flight of your life. It towers, it twists, it turns, it tumbles. It is an acrobat. And maybe that thrill ride is something that I feel every day by farming in a natural environment.
That is a really lovely picture, but maybe I can put that enthusiasm and turn it on its head and think back to the issue of water and the shortage of water, and think about how we think about water, and bring in our next guest, Ben Walthenson. So Ben, I think you'd have loved that image of farming. You're an artist, designer, co-founder of Moving Brands, but you are passionate about water. And in particular, I know you've been working with some UN agencies looking at water as a human right. But I'm just wondering, do we care in the same way as we've heard from Martin? Do we care at all about water?
Morning. I love what you said. I'm a colouring in person, so I'm not a farmer. I grew up on the South Downs, walking the South Downs, always adored water and nature. And I think that you made a point about being within the painting. I felt like I was within that painting because I had the privilege of walking across the South Downs, seeing the sea. You know, I wasn't strapped to the front of a what was that, Martin? A lapwing, but I could have been. And I think why am I here? I'm here, I think, because I've spent a lot of time in how do we change hearts and minds in the consumer sense. So right at the other end, mainly with companies that are technical or, quite consumer-based. And what frightens me is how little we care, we being the public, generally, at least in the West, about water, and how it's just totally overlooked. It's not seen, it's not valued, and it's not understood. We were recently trying to tell this story about water and realized that, there was a time when water was brought by horse and cart, and you could actually see it moving along the road, and understand that there was work and care taken to get that water to your front door, into your tap, and all of those things are just taken for granted. So I think when I was asked if I could join this, I'm coming at it from not the day-to-day issues of farming or the kind of mixed agendas between different organizations, which might be a water company, a farmer, biodiversity, well-being, landscape learning, education, but how do we begin to make people care? Because if it's just a worthy story, no one's going to pay attention, unfortunately. So we have to get some drama into this. We have to get some conflict. We have to get some, guts into the subject of water, and then more broadly nature. I think just quickly on the nature side, this idea of back to nature drives me mad. We've got AI, taking over the world. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But nature's way more advanced than AI. We go forward to nature, not back to nature. And I think coming to the schools and education as well, how do we excite the next generation? The next generation should be, for me, they should be looking at nature like NASA made space. Space is a black void. I mean, it's an incredible thing, but it's, the story and adventure that was projected into space through NASA, I'm no particular expert on NASA, but why don't we feel about nature as NASA somehow managed to conjure around space, which is nature and is incredible as well. But I just feel that this is sort of, we've got to go forward to nature. Water's obviously the bottom line, surely the bottom line. We're made of water. I think we start as 90% water, don't we? End up as 50. So we basically desaturate through life. Anyway, so obviously I love water as a subject. I'm interested in how do we tell stories about it. I don't know if at some point we've got a little story that we told. So Duncan mentioned Longbridge. I'm lucky to be involved in that, trying to help with that story. I'm constantly learning about farming, so I'm not going to speak about farming. James can tell me about farming or whatever. But I'm very interested in how we change hearts and minds. So we've made a little step in that direction with a film about water, which we'll show in a minute. But yeah, that's really what I'm here for.
But I wonder practically, how do we change people's hearts and minds about water? I mean, I think when you talk about people not really caring about water, if you think about how most of the faiths throughout the world regard water, they see it as something sacred. And I think we've lost touch with that. But, you know, whether you think about people bathing in the River Ganges or the tradition of holy wells in Ireland, right across the world, faiths have always brought us back to water as something sacred for birth and rebirth and ritual. So how do we kickstart then people to get really interested in water who just think of it as something you get when you turn on a tap?
I'll make one quick swing at that because it's huge as a question. Too big, obviously, but I think you've got to... some obvious things. It needs an identity. We need to have a place in conversation. Water's not got... in a way, it hasn't got an identity, weirdly, considering we're made of it. I'm not really saying I'm not suggesting we'd rebrand water, but we need to bring a place for it in the conversation so that it's, you know, spoken about, and that comes through storytelling, and then those work at all levels. Obviously, small stories, you know, and big stories, and it's got to be brought to life and have meaning. Stories bring meaning. If you just give facts, no one cares, you know. So it's got to be storytelling, and that's, you know. That's on all of us, really. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. And we'll have a look at that film in just a minute, because I think that tells a really lovely story. But I wonder, Mark, how would you retell that story or rethink how we see water so that it's not just seen as this utility?
Can I slightly change the question? Because
you go for it.
Yeah, it's a very politician answer there, sorry. But the... part of my role is to raise the profile of water amongst the agricultural community. So as well as telling the story to everyone, there are certain groups of people that you need to tell a particular story to. And one of the things I'd like to do is to get farming more excited about water, because sometimes it's not always immediate on the agenda. There are so many pressures on farming at the moment that it doesn't always sort of rise up there to where it potentially needs to be, particularly, as I said, with all the challenges around climate change that are impacting immediately with extreme weather on farming businesses. It would be nice to sort of tell a story about the thing that farmers are passionate about, which is their land, the food they produce, and how they do it. And as I was saying about sort of fresh fruit and vegetables, water underpins all of that. And it's sort of getting that point across and understanding how it fits into that story, that narrative about the thing that they're most passionate about, that is one of the ways in which we can potentially communicate that message more effectively across the people, and for the farming community, sort of like to understand where water sits within, not just for them as a business, but also for the thing that they're most passionate about, what they really care about and what they're doing. So yeah, that's the sort of argument I make.
I mean, that's an obvious question to put to you as a farmer, because you really enthused us about farming and farming as a career and the joy and the beauty and the splendour of farming. But you didn't mention water.
Well, I think everything I mentioned was predicated upon water and the presence of water in the landscape. The fact that it is connected and within us and is a huge part of everything is incredible. The lapwing comes because of the safety of water. It comes because of the invertebrate populations at the water's edge. It comes because of the seasonal changes that blow it in from Asia and cause it to coalesce here in the winter. And it feeds its young precociously, those little chicks on sticks that walk around the mud to feed themselves. Water is essential. It's essential in the upbringing of our livestock, the drinking water that they have, the habits in their health and well-being through the seasons in their life. It is absolutely fundamental. And I think I have focused, and I was one of those boys who could not stand in a puddle without joining it to another one. It is the beaver instinct in us all to play with water. So I think implicit, and maybe that's so ingrained in me that I don't just talk about water. To me, it's such a part of the dimensions we live in. It's visceral and tangible. Obviously for us on the Pevensey Marshes, it is the engine room of generating change for biodiversity conservation. But it's also the medium in which we produce food, soil and water. I think getting other farmers interested in water being on their farm rather than running off it rapidly, which is probably the history of many of our wetlands, has been an interesting struggle. A number of my neighbours thought that what I was doing was frankly disgraceful.
So that's holding water.
So we were holding water on our farm. We flood over 500 acres in the winter, sheets of water, some 3 or 4 feet deep, and we allow them to evaporate to create wetlands, reed beds, fens, stodgy, muddy, insect-ridden, swampy areas. You know, the wetlands are not always friendly. We are all challenged by what comes with nature. And I think the farming community, on seeing healthy livestock, and more importantly, profitable farming, whilst returning this, it's a long-term thing, it's a generational thing. I had to take Betty Wenham around in my Land Rover. As she sounds, she was a tweedy old lady, sorry girls, and she thought what I did was reprehensible. And I used to say, Betty, I want to take you for a trip in the Land Rover. She said, Martin, I'm not ever going to get in a Land Rover on my own with you. Don't be ridiculous. You will charm me into believing what you believe. One day, she was out watching the hounds hunting, and I managed to get her into the Land Rover. The weather wasn't great. Betty, you need to get out the rain. I got her in there. And I showed her the stock. I showed her swirls of teal over the water. We had some redshank calling in the distance, and she just said, oh, I haven't heard a redshank since I was a girl. Blast you, Martin.
So that's all about stories, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It does go back to stories of changing hearts and minds.
It's about communities too, our bit of our community. As a farmer, I live in a very small community. I like my neighbours, I enjoy them, I don't always agree, but they are my community. And I really enjoy living at ground level, at the base of the pyramid. And I think the way we communicate comes at every level.
And maybe, Ben, that's what needs to be done, that linking up of the community, that sort of seeing that everybody has a responsibility and a role to play in water and water resilience and water conservation. So trying to draw that thread so that it's not just the farmers who have to think about water. Maybe that's what the way forward is.
Yes, but it's too big, isn't it? I think the thing that struck me about the story was let's talk about the next generation and how to get enthusiasm with kids. Let's just say with kids who are all on phones and so on. There's a new natural history GCSE, I think it is, and someone said, nobody's going to care about landscape if they haven't visited it. It's very hard to engage a new generation if they haven't heard. I've already forgotten the bird that she heard when she was young. Lapwings, thanks. So and there's an incredible number, I can't remember the statistic, but there's 13 schools and a thing locally called the Coastal Schools Partnership, and it's around between Lewis and Eastbourne, Pevensey. And those schools are state and private. And an unbelievable percentage of kids haven't even been to the coast, the water, and it's all coastal schools. So, and those schools and that natural history, GCSE, just as a quick specific example, because I don't really enjoy talks that are too abstract, so I would like to ground what I'm saying and hopefully some relevant local things. They need access to landscape. these 13 schools, and it's thousands of kids if you add it up. And obviously farmers have, as I've understood it, at a basic level, they've enough to worry about with the day today. But we need to get the next generation into landscape, because no one's going to care for something that they have no basic appreciation for. That's called landscape learning. So there's a level there that's, I think, in building block terms, there's story and there's all these things. But if there's no starting ground to sort of say, oh, I remember, I've experienced that, it's very hard for people to care if they've got no relationship to something. So it's a very small answer within a big question, but it's quite tangible and I like it. And I know Longbridge is helping that, and I know there's lots of farmers helping. But how do you manage that? Who's responsible even for that access? That's a headache. You've got a bus of kids arriving there's a lot to work out. But I don't know if I quite answered the question, but I wanted to.
You're right. I mean, education must be part of it. Enthusiasm for farming and allowing people to see must be part of the answer. But money is an issue too. So maybe, Mark, that's a hard one for you. Who pays for the water? And do those who pay for the water get most say over the water? Do we also have to think about the economics of this?
You hit on a real complicated and challenging question that has to be overcome if you want to achieve the ultimate goal of having sustainable water. I think it's challenging because you're having to unpick a lot of hidden costs that aren't necessarily accounted for in different areas. So is the cost of making sure that we have both plentiful and clean water included in the price paid in the supply chain for purchasing food, for example, for us? Is it possible that what is being delivered for wider public goods as well as for individual benefits for farming businesses, for example? How is that recognised? Because a lot of the actions being asked for, that we're living in a very constrained world in terms of economics at the moment, and it's about actually recognising where some of these costs are in order to deliver what we want in terms of society with clean water and plentiful water. It's, as I say, it's not an easy question to navigate, but unless there's some mechanism from a farming perspective, there has to be some mechanism of recognizing where the challenges are, making sure that best practice is followed, and when all those boxes are ticked in terms of achieving that what is being delivered by farming community in terms of the broader needs of water. So, for example, making sure that there is the majority of rainfall lands on farmland. That rain must be converted into the water effectively that we drink and use for everything else as well. How that public good is delivered, if best practice is being followed, should be recognised. And so that's the sort of thought train that needs to go on if, for example, the farming community is going to be expected to more effectively play its part in this water cycle.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions in just a minute, but why don't we have a look at that film that Ben referred to? Because I think it's truly wonderful to be reminded and to be enthusiastic about water and to set it in this local landscape. So, Duncan, can you help us play the film on the screen? Well, Duncan's doing that. Do you want to say some more about it?
I'll quickly try and explain it.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ben.
so there's a supernatural nature reserve. In fact, it's a Seven Sisters Supernatural Nature Reserve, which is really catchy. The triple SNNR, which is near Longbridge. And in my simple terms, it's a piece of land that's being used to sort of integrate farming with water, with well-being, and kind of test a lot of different ways. But ultimately, it's about water. So we were tasked with, I think the king was arriving to open it, which is always a good sign. And we wanted to tell a story around water for this SNNR. There you go. This is the film.
Before we begin,
a couple of minutes.
Look up. Those shapes represent microscopic sea creatures that lived here millions of years ago. Their remains became the chalk beneath the South Downs. and that chalk holds our drinking water. These hills began in an ancient sea. Today they are known around the world as the Seven Sisters. The wide open landscape of the South Downs. But its most vital feature lies hidden beneath our feet. Over millions of years, the chalk below the downs became a vast natural filter. Rain falling on these hills slowly seeps through the porous chalk below. There, the chalk stores and purifies that water over time. Beneath this landscape lies one of the country's most important groundwater systems, supplying clean drinking water to towns, villages, farms, and communities across Sussex and beyond. For generations, people have worked inside these hills, carving tunnels through the chalk to reach, collect, and move the water beneath the downs. Carrying out extraordinary work in darkness and danger, so water could reach the communities above. Not so long ago, water arrived by horse and cart. It was visible, it was valued, it was precious. Today it arrives quietly through the tap, but its journey still begins here. Now that system faces a growing challenge. Climate change is bringing longer dry periods, followed by heavier rains. This ancient chalk aquifer is remarkable, but it is not limitless. The balance between land, water, and people is becoming harder to sustain. The Seven Sisters Supranational Nature Reserve offers a way to bring those systems together, working with nature to protect the land and the water beneath it. Because how we care for the land above the chalk directly shapes the quality of the water below. At Longbridge, we are reimagining the landscape. From Exmoor ponies grazing chalk grassland to cover crop trials that build healthier soils, to rainwater harvesting and new digital monitoring tools. Protecting this landscape means protecting the water beneath it. Because although it arrives quietly through the tap, it is more precious than it has ever been. The future of our water begins here.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a really wonderful testimony. Just a lovely story. Thank you.
Well, it's a group, lots of people involved in that. I think what's fun about that film, I think it's very mild until you see the real danger and drama of drilling the underneath of the aquifer. To me, it becomes, a nice country story. It's a nice country story without any drama if you don't bring in some of that. And I don't know if anyone felt that, but I was quite stunned when I saw what was happening. I don't think that would happen now. I don't know if the HR department would allow that. So it's a small story, but it's got just a little bit of dark in it, light and dark, and we need to bring some of that, some of those qualities. Otherwise, there's just no drama.
And some of the sacrifice that people have paid to bring us water. Anybody like to ask any questions to our three guests? Anybody got a question? And I think we've got a microphone. Yes, please. Thanks, Duncan.
Good morning. Just like to say thank you very much to all the panelists. That was amazing. A quick question about if anyone knows about boreholes. So we farm at Wivelsfield on heavy Wilden clay, and we're paying more and more for the water, for our cattle, everything on the farm. So I'm considering putting a borehole down. But then some people say that in a few years' time, you won't be able to put boreholes down, or if you do put a borehole down, you may have to pay the Southern Water. So I just wondered if there's any advice. I don't know if, Mark, you know about this, and if you'd recommend people to put boreholes.
You can take my mic if you would want to come back on that.
Thank you. Yes. It's always a complicated question because it depends on context, but there is, I mean, supplying water from the groundwater, is, under the challenges we've got with climate change, potentially a much more sustainable option in terms of private supply, basically. And so there is a drive to actually looking at making that much more common, particularly for farming businesses. I think one of the cautions around it is that it has to be sited well. It has to have a resilience plan. So in other words, if boreholes are limited, if you don't have a plan about what you're going to do when potentially borehole might run dry, that's something to always have in hand. But in terms of should we be drilling more boreholes, what's the long-term future for them? I think that they are certainly one of the part of the mix of how we're going to be more sustainable. They should be considered by businesses. There is a challenge in water scarce areas about being able to do that. If you're taking more than 20 cubic meters per day from a borehole, whether you'd be able to get a license from the agency to be able to do so. And there's obviously the problem around making sure that it is, so you have a plan to do if that borehole potentially runs dry. So if you tick all those questions, then yes, I think it might be a really good option.
Hello. This is not a question, it's kind of an observation. So my husband and I, we're lucky enough to visit New Zealand quite regularly. And the thing that I notice there is that in the countryside, so only in the major cities do they have water coming into their houses with no thought about it. Because in the rural areas, they all have water tanks outside their houses, and the water is delivered to them. And I just think that, I'm not saying we should necessarily do that in this country, but it does make you stop and think. It makes you realise the value of it when you're literally seeing it delivered. It's just an observation.
Thanks very much. Question for Ben, I think, primarily. To what extent do you think there is a place for threat and scarcity in the stories that need to be told? I'm very struck by what you were all saying about the need to get this story told in schools for children, particularly who have never seen the landscape, who've never seen what even like a borehole looks like, never seen. I understand all of that, but threat and scarcity are scary things. And I'm just wondering if you think there is a place for that. You know, we're all conscious of the 53,000 different things that everybody in this tent and elsewhere has to deal with on a daily basis. You know, whether it's the school run, whether it's the energy bill, whatever the heck it is. How does water become central to everyday life? And the point about the water tanks in New Zealand, I think, is a very good one. Who values water in this tent? Well, probably in this tent, more people than most do actually value it, but most people don't. The tap is a problem, actually, because the tap brings it, and it's always there, and you get really cross when you don't have water, because it's a human right, we all, you know. So threat and scarcity is a scary thing, but I wonder if there's a place in that story for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't ask me for the business model on boreholes. Really great question. Obviously it's just one opinion. I think that I have a 15-year-old daughter. She watches Stranger Things, or she did when she was probably way too young. So actually, let me back up. I gave a talk at a school thing, trying to get them interested in the subject of water. Actually, more the flooding, the water level rising, and the fact that the Pevensey area might have a lot of flooding in the next 100 years. It was a real hospital pass. Actually, they kind of gave me 120 kids and said, "Good luck." I started that. I wanted to get them interested. I started that talk with a scene from a movie that's like a, what do you call that? A catastrophe movie, whatever that is. Absolutely horrific. You know, like a huge tidal tsunami hitting New York. You know, knocking over buildings, and we're talking about 1 meter rise in the ocean in the next 100 years. I just wanted to wake the kids up after lunch. You know, some of them, I thought they were 13-ish, and some of them were 8. But so I played as dramatically as possible this opening scene from some disaster movie. And the governors were there, and teachers from 12 schools and parents. And they looked horrified at me because apparently there's a thing called climate anxiety or something like that. Yeah, I didn't read that memo. But the kids don't, they understand. I said, this is not Pevensey Bay, you know. It's obviously New York with taxi cabs and people screaming. And I think, you know, my daughter watched, getting back to Stranger Things, that's the preamble. She watches Stranger Things, she's 13, 14, 15. I think that the next generation, I think we can handle some drama, we can handle some scary stuff, you know. I think we need to hit it head on as far as we humanly can and bring some real facts that are into the narrative. And if that's frightening, then great. It's always nice if you can sell an opportunity, not fear. But the fact of the matter is people are more likely to react to fear than they are an opportunity. So we really ought to just go for that, I think. Obviously, we have to be age appropriate, which I can give advice on if everyone wants help on that. But let's do it. Otherwise, it's just going to get more radical later, isn't it? If we don't. And I've heard quite a few angles that people can't talk about things because it's too frightening. It's like, that's not going to get better, is it? Sorry, I could go on a bit about that.
Hi, thanks. Martin's farming picture is a joy. I could listen to that all day. That would be brilliant. I think just following on from the other 2 points, the economics of water are moving up the farming agenda because we've had 3 or 4 really difficult years which affects yield and profit. And not having water, to Ben's point, brings immediate focus. I mean, just look at Tunbridge Wells. I mean, that got everybody's attention all over the country. Do we not think, does the panel not think that farming's focus on water, and crucially, to Martin's point, keeping water comes from the industry itself, because without water, whatever the farming type, it can't sustain itself?
I did read a report recently that the whole of Europe is not retaining enough water. You know, it isn't melting glaciers, the drying out of Spain altogether. Southeast England is in the heart of that. The security of people's water, their health, their ability to get rid of waste are the key issues that the landscape is coping with now. On the levels, I know I talk about the levels a lot, but stick to what you know. We provide drinking water. We siphon into springs all over the Weald, and we pipe water down to bodies on the levels. That water has to be managed for drinkers. In the summer, the sole water input, because of the interruption of spring-fed supplies, comes out of the sewage plants. They have to treat water to very, very high levels. And I would say that Hailsham A and B, much as we sometimes deride them, actually do pretty well. There are technical solutions that are driving that. There is quite big investment in driving that water. I'm a taker of that wastewater. We have a plant that grows in our ditch called Greater Bladderwort. It is the world's fastest moving plant. It catches insects. It snaps shut when it feels the surface tension of the water alter. But the water is so clean that it requires the eating of insects to get its nutrition. So water joins us the whole time, not just when we're flooding, but in every conceivable element of all of our lives. And I think the idea that national security is underpinned by the provision of basics that's why we're all 3 sat here.
Thank you. I think that's a very good way to end. I'm just going to ask for a very quick comment from each of our panellists. So let's dream a bit. if you had to imagine how we'd be viewing water in 10 to 15 years' time, what would you imagine? All right.
I'll have a go.
Go.
I think what we've talked about is generations of people who have, you go back 100 years, Peter Scott being told by his father to take an interest in wildlife. This is not a new challenge. We're deep into this technically. But in 15 years' time, I want people to worship water. I want them to be wearing robes and regalia and having boozy nights on the spring line of the South Down.
You
because
heard it
they
first
worship
here.
it.
I love that. That's it. Well, there you see, next year at the show, we'll put that into practice. What a good idea. If you had a dream.
Yes. I think I like the idea of water and wine. That would be a good combination. In terms of the way, as well as all of the communication, all of the getting the story of water much better out there for everyone, for me, I would like to see 10 and 20 years' time there to be a much more joined up, integrated water strategy of how we deal with things. You're talking about storing water on the land, talking about, Pevensey, for example, Pevensey levels. At the moment, internal drainage boards, people who look after the water in terms of keeping some of our lowland areas in good state, are only remitted to pump water out. They're not remitted to consider about keeping water in the area and sort of retaining water. All of these sort of barriers to doing that sort of joined up thinking about how we deal with water, see those removed in 10 to 20 years and really having a joined up feeling about when the water lands on the ground, how it's stored, how it's cared for, what happens to it, that it is utilised, that it is that it has the maximum opportunity to be of benefit given the situation that we have with the extremes of the climate, that benefits the public, that benefits food production, that benefits the environment. If that sort of integrated water strategy in 10, 20 years, working in practice, would be my dream, as it were.
Thank you. And Ben, do you think you'll be out of a job telling stories about water in 10 to 15 years' time?
That'd be great, yeah. I'll be at Martin's wearing robes. I was trying to think what I could add. I'm really into water, so I'm into this. So first of all, I think it would be a bit more, on the fear factor, I think it would be a bit more like gold, an asset, a thing that everyone needs, that they pay for. And on the more spiritual or more kind of exciting to me level, I think we're going to find out. Water's so poorly understood. It's like an absolute mystery. I think some would say the biggest mystery in the sort of known universe. It's like as a material or a substance. It's actually both. So there's just an incredible fascination with water, and I think we're going to know more. I think with AI and things like that, we're going to know more about water in the next 10 years I hope. So I think we'll realize its intelligence. I think many things about water that we just totally don't consider right now. So I personally believe there's an intelligence in water that we're going to discover. I'd like to see that happen, because I think it might help us put ourselves in perspective. So yeah, but I think at the fear level, we're just going to need to treat it like gold.
Are you going to sign up next year then to come with the white robes to join Martin and join Mark here for the water and wine? So that will be served this time next year here in this tent. So thank you very much to all my three panelists. That's been a really thoughtful conversation. Thank you. And a really complex conversation, but thank you very much for bringing it to life. Thank you. So thank you. Join me in a round of applause. Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for your attention and your questions. And thank you, Duncan, for hosting this conversation.